Okay, this would be part 8, or part 3 of Australia. So we got to Adelaide, stayed with this family. We're taken off to go north up towards Alice Springs, and which is kind of located north of Adelaide, in the middle of Australia. And so we kind of did some hitchhiking and walking and different things, and the next main place we ended up at, I don't know the name of it, but it was just kind of a gas station. Must have been like a truck stop, but very remote. Dirt road. The highway was dirt. I've heard it's paved now, but the road in the Northern Territory, I think they call it, and they don't have states in Australia, they have provinces, and I think there's 5, and there's one that's like not even a province yet. It's just called the Northern Territory. And one of the things that struck Bill was that in the Northern Territory they had these truck trains, in which back in the States on the freeway they'd only let a truck carry 2 boxes, behind it. Now they do 3, I think. Well, down in the Northern Territory in Australia they would do 4. And so these things were really long, like a train, because there weren't too many curves in the road and stuff like that. So we tried hitchhiking with some trucks and stuff, and they didn't really want to take us, probably company policy or whatever. Again, they weren't real big on hitchhiking, and so we were out in this place. Must have been kind of a truck stop, store, not much there. You could go out into these kind of wooden stalls off to the side and get a shower for 50 cents, and we ended up hitchhiking there for 3 days, and a car never came by. Nothing came by for 3 days. So one of the things I remember about that was we just kind of hung around this store and stuff and waiting for cars, and there were some trucks that showed up and they wouldn't take us, and so at night we just kind of walk out into the desert a couple hundred yards, just out in the middle of nowhere, kind of like Eastern Oregon, very flat, sagebrush. And so one night this train came by at night with all its lights on. Seemed like it was about a half a mile away, quarter mile away, something like that. So that was kind of interesting to see that. And so the big thing that happened here is there was a American military base not too far from this place. And so the road that went by the store was paved. And they had maybe a 10-mile stretch of pavement where the store was, and there was dirt on both sides, and so these guys came along. They were Americans, in a kind of a government white van that you'd have people in with the seats and stuff. And so they said, "Hey, are you guys Americans?" And yeah, we're Americans. And okay, so they kind of adopted us, if you will, and said, "Well, we're going to sneak you on the base." And so, we were game. We didn't know anything. And so what it turned out to be was this American base. And what they said was they tested missiles out there once in a while. Might have had something to do with the space program in Gemini, or the Apollo stuff. But anyway, it was just your typical government base. I mean, this thing was out in the middle of nowhere. Cyclone fence all the way around it. Once you went inside this base, it was like streets and gutters just curbs and gutters and pavement and grass and brick buildings, and everything was very organized, like you'd expect the government to have. So they snuck us on the base, and so it looked like the only thing to do out there was either drink or play or bowling. They had their own bowling alley there, probably a movie theater too. The people that were there were very discontent. They had pretty much all signed up for the military for 4 years, with the idea that they would go to Vietnam for 2 years, and then they could go to like Australia or Japan or maybe someplace else. And they thought, well, we'll go to Australia. That would be fun. So, they'd all done their stint 2 years in Vietnam, and so they were going to do 2 years in this base in Australia, which they thought would be really cool. What they didn't know was this base was out in the middle of nowhere, and so they'd go, if you get a 3-day pass, you can't even make it to Sydney in 3 days. So, there's really nothing to do. They were kind of, somewhat, they thought they were kind of prisoners out there, and so they got us showers, and so we got all cleaned up, got showers and stuff, so that was cool, and they fed us and kind of took care of us. And so there was kind of an issue in the dorm rooms of sneaking us on the base, and there was kind of a guy there that was the highest ranking guy in that group, and so he was just questioning us whether we were really Americans or not, and so they thought they'd be okay and it wouldn't be the end of the world. And to be honest with you, I think it almost felt like these guys were trying to get kicked out of the military, because they really didn't like being stuck out on this base for 2 years. And so I put on the nicest clothes I had, and somebody in the group was going to go over to the bowling alley or something and probably just, kind of show off that they'd snuck somebody on the base or something. I'm not sure what Bill did then. Maybe he was taking a shower. I don't know. But so I go over to the bowling alley and, just kind of hanging out and talking to some people. And so this guy that's probably 32, 33 years old asked me, oh, so you came on the base, huh? Yeah, I came on the base. These guys got us on the base. He goes, well, did you sign any paperwork when you came in at the gate? And, I didn't want to lie to him, so I just said, well, no. It kind of seems like these guys are sneaking us on. And so nothing became of that. And so that night, they were having a big party in one of these dorm rooms. And one of the guys said, hey, if you're tired and want to go to bed, you can use my bunk. We're going to stay up all night. Maybe it was Saturday night. I have no idea. But, it seemed like they were doing this once a week or something. And so I ended up going to bed pretty early, so I don't know what happened. But I remember I got up in the morning, and I think Bill might have stayed up all night too. But so I got a good night's sleep and a mattress. Remember, we've been sleeping on the ground since we left Sydney, pretty much, except for Kringle. And so, yeah, we're just kind of, at night, we just kind of had a blanket or a sleeping bag, and we're just kind of, I just had a blanket, I think, that I'd gotten in Hawaii. And so, sleeping on the ground, so to be in a room with a mattress was pretty nice. So, this is hard to imagine, but I got up the next day, and there was kind of some scuttlebutt going on with the cleaning ladies. And the kind of the chatter you were hearing was, you guys need to get them out of here. You better get them out of here. Kind of like, I don't know if the guy at the bowling alley had told somebody, or maybe it was just kind of known that a couple guys had gotten snuck on the base, and that was Bill and I. So I'm trying to figure out how to get out of there, and I'm thinking, well, maybe if we go jump the fence, or I didn't know, and I thought, well, I don't know, we could be in trouble, you know. So before I left, I went into this room where they had this party. And it was kind of a dorm room. The buildings were brick. There was windows at the end of the room. It was maybe 14 feet by 20 feet, you know, and that was kind of their party room. The windows at the end of this room were completely busted out from guys drinking fifths of hard liquor and throwing the bottles out the window, not making this up. And I looked on the floor of this whole entire room, and there was 2 inches of just broken glass. And I'm not talking a couple of bottles. I'm talking 2 inches of glass. You could not step in that room without stepping on glass. It was piled up thick, you know, bottles, bottom of bottles, all that kind of stuff. And I just went, oh my gosh. I mean, do these guys do this all the time? It was just like, you know, I don't know what happened. I mean, somebody's going to have to fix those windows, or anyway, we don't know what happened, but the guys that got us on the base, they said, well, we're just going to take you out of here now. So we got in the back of this van that we came in on and just kind of sat in the back, and they went out to the gate and they just waved us through and took us out and dropped us off at this little store, gas fuel station, and never saw them again. So I'm sure that base is probably still there. The government never gets rid of anything. But so anyway, that was a wild, crazy night. And so that must have been about the second night we were there, because the third night we slept out in the desert and just decided that, you know, gosh, there's just nobody coming by here. And so we'll just, in the next day or something, the bus was going to come through. So we decided to buy a bus ticket from, we thought, well, we'll get a bus ticket from there to Alice Springs. And so the big thing about Alice Springs is there's a rock out there called Ayers Rock, and it's the biggest rock in the world. It's like 1.5 miles long and several hundred yards high. And so one of the funny stories was we were kind of planning our trip back at Kringle with John Lott about going up through Australia. And so this Ayers Rock, and so I asked him one time when we were there, I said, well, how far out of town is Ayers Rock from Alice Springs? And he goes, oh, it's just a stone's throw. And so I'm thinking, oh, well, we'll just walk out there then, you know. Well, anyway, we got up to Alice Springs, and the Ayers Rock was 150 miles out of town. So they had tour buses that went out there. And so anyway, we didn't end up going. We couldn't afford it. It was probably $40-50 or something to go out there for the day or whatever. And anyway, we didn't do it. But what was interesting, a lot of things were interesting, but this road that went up to Alice Springs was all dirt. I've heard it's paved now, but back then it was all dirt, and we're talking washboard. So if you can imagine sitting on like in a Greyhound bus type thing, and the back end was chattering so bad, dust was just coming up out of the seats and the upholstery inside the bus. It was just dusty. So we get up to Alice Springs, and we were going to spend the night. We found this church, actually. Kind of a brick church. It had a lawn around the back of it, and it looked like the house next door was probably for the pastor. And so we were kind of just sitting in the back of this church on the lawn, just looking at the Main Street there. It was almost like a modern day Gunsmoke type show. I mean, the cowboys were coming into town. It must have been Saturday night or something, I don't know, but all the ranch hands were kind of coming into town. And so we went over across the street. There was a vacant lot there with a bunch of trash out there, and we were going to sleep over there. And so we kind of went over there. It was after dark, and it was like there's so much foot traffic on the sidewalk. It wasn't that far away from the sidewalk. And I thought, man, we just can't sleep here. So we ended up going back over across the street behind the church and just slept on the lawn. And I don't know if the pastor was gone, but nobody ever showed up in that house next door. Maybe he was gone for the weekend, or I don't know what. But anyway, that's where we ended up sleeping, was on that lawn. And then another time when we were in Alice Springs, we walked down to a kind of a park, and we bought a loaf of bread, some meat at a deli type grocery store or something like that, and we were sitting out in the park with our packs and Bill's guitar. You're packing this stuff with you all the time. You can't leave it anymore. So everything you got, you're carrying. And so these two Aborigine guys come up and they sit down next to us, like I'm sitting here and Bill's over there, and so these two guys sit over here like this, right here. Bill and I are maybe 4 feet apart, so they're like 4 feet apart, and they just sit down and they start making a sandwich with our stuff. Didn't say hi to us, didn't talk, didn't do anything. First time we'd seen Aborigines like up close. And so we just kind of had the attitude, it's like, well, if they're that hungry, we'll just let them eat, so we're going to bug them. But anyway, they knew English. And the funniest thing, their names were Bill and Dave. And we had that happen 3 times on the trip. We ran into 2 guys that were traveling. Another time was in India. And their names were Bill and Dave. So that was kind of interesting. So then for some reason, I don't know what happened. I don't know why we just didn't stay at that church again. Maybe people showed up. Well, the next day it was probably Sunday. So anyway, one of the nights we kind of went up to this monument that was kind of on a hill, and it was just all rock. And so we're sleeping up there, not getting much sleep. I mean, it's just like sleeping on a rock. And so anyway, the next morning, pretty early, the sun's coming up, and the police show up, and so they kind of asked us a few questions and stuff, and we said, well, we're just sleeping here for tonight. We're actually heading out of town up to Darwin. So they said, okay, fine, no problem. So they were nice, and probably not much going on in that town back then, I wouldn't think. So Bill was pretty fascinated with these trucks because his dad was a truck driver in the United States, Jacksonville. And so Bill was pretty fascinated with these trucks. So he really wanted to get a ride with one of these truckers, sitting in a cab and one of these four long cargo trains. And so he ended up getting a ride with a guy, which this was the only time I remember. We almost got split up in Paris, but we didn't. That's later in the story. And so Bill gets a ride with this trucker that's going to go up about halfway to Darwin. And so I bought a bus ticket, and I said, okay, well, I'll meet you up at that town, about halfway between Alice Springs and Darwin. So I got on the bus by myself and all the stuff, and bus pulls out of Alice Springs, and it goes for a ways, and we got up to this town. Seemed like it was quite a long drive. Same thing, dirt road, dusty. And so we pull up at this kind of park, must be where the bus station was or something, and here's Bill. And it was overnight. So it's like, so I was on the bus from Alice Springs up to this place about halfway to Darwin. It was like all day and all night. And then the next morning, and so we pull up to this place, and here's Bill sleeping on the bench. I think I had taken everything, pretty much everything, on the bus. So there he was. So it's like, okay, so then he ended up getting a ticket up to Darwin. And so we stopped at a place that was kind of one of the stops was kind of like, kind of a stagecoach stop. It wasn't there weren't any stagecoaches anymore, but that's kind of what it was. And you'd get off the bus and go into this place and eat and buy a meal and stuff. And so I remember, of course, everywhere you're going, it's not like you're a movie star, but it's like, we were Americans, we had that accent. I mean, we stuck out like a sore thumb. And back then you just didn't see Americans out in the outback. Probably not too much out of Sydney or Queensland. And so anyway, I do remember we kind of went into this bar restaurant place and started talking, and this one guy was talking about World War II or something, and he was on Borneo, and he was the guy that had out there with the flags having the B-24s take off. And I said, well, my dad was a squadron commander pilot on Borneo. And so anyway, we kind of connected a little bit there, and everybody in the group in there thought that was kind of interesting, and small world. And so we got up to Darwin, and we were staying at people would just like rent out rooms. And so we rented a room, and they must get a lot of rain up there because most of the houses were built up on stilts, so you could walk around underneath the house. And we were there one time, and it was raining that day, and yeah, you just kind of go out and stand under the house, and it's just pouring. It's kind of tropical up in there in the northern coast of Australia, and so we used to walk around at night. It seemed like there was only a couple of streets, but we'd go on this couple-mile hike, or just walking around the town just to see stuff at night. And so one of the things that was interesting, we saw a Lotus there, a Lotus, which was pretty amazing for being in Darwin. And then, and I've got pictures of this, Darwin is the 5th largest city in Australia. Australia, land-wise, is about as big as the continental United States, but there was only 12 million people in there. So, not a lot of people, and not so much competition as the United States had. And so, in 1971, Darwin, the 5th largest city in Australia, was getting their first television station, Channel 9. I've got pictures of it. And it was a block building, and we asked around. They said, "Oh, it's going to be black and white." They didn't have color there yet. They didn't have color. Maybe they had color TV in Sydney. I don't know, but they didn't have. They just had TV. They were just getting TV in 1971 in Darwin. So that was kind of interesting, and so we moved from this first place we stayed to another place that was kind of a B&B place, I guess, that rented out rooms. And So we had heard on our travels up the road from Alice Springs, we had heard that there were